Let's move to our last inductee. Last inductee is Arlie Schorger. As I noted at the beginning, he was almost an unforgotten or a forgotten person who worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And thanks to Stan Temple and others, we now see his legacy for what it is. As they will indicate, he knew the giants. He was a good friend of Uncle Leopold. And indeed, Stan will outline the fact that Uncle Leopold may not have been the icon that he is if it were not for Arlie, his good friend Arlie Schorger. As a man of many talents, he excelled in chemistry, as an inventor, a businessman, and a wildlife conservationist. In conservation circles, he was most well known for his work as a natural historian and for his books on the life histories of Wisconsin's wildlife and, equally important, man's impact on them. His 1955 award-winning book, The Passenger Pigeon, as Natural History and Extinction, helped advance a global concern for wildlife management, biodiversity, and the new field of conservation biology. I'll let Stan and others tell the rest of his story. I will hope that one or more of them will talk about the Wyalusing monument and the fact that his quote, which is part of his legacy, is chiseled in bronze and sets upon stone overlooking the Mississippi River. Maybe just as a quick aside, very short. Like George says, we never quite know where we get this urge for conservation, for nature. I grew up in a large family with a pond in the backyard. I went to that pond for solace and maybe to get away from my 9 brothers and sisters and the din that was always in our household. So I've been, I like quiet. But I also remember at an age, very, very early age, about 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, riding in an old DeSoto car with my parents, and I was still young enough to sit between them, and we went to Bagley, Wisconsin, to visit my grandmother and grandfather who were taking care of my great uncle's hotel in Bagley, and my grandparents were the cook and the caretaker of this wonderful hotel. And we lived upstairs, and there were baths every night, and the road wasn't paved, and there was a boardwalk along both sides. Coming back to the point of the story, I remember my grandparents taking me to Wyalusing Park and having a picnic in front of this monument when I was 5 or 6 years old. And I remember my dad talking about passenger pigeons, and that they used to be plentiful, and now they're not. So, what is it now? 55 years later, no, 65 years later, the story comes around one more time. We have a nomination from Stan Temple, excellent nomination, and he worked with 4 different co-nominators: the Wisconsin Society of Ornithology, Uncle Leopold Foundation, Wisconsin Academy, and the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology at Madison campus. We have 3 speakers. Stanley Temple is Professor Emeritus, Department of Forestry and Wildlife Ecology, and also a Senior Fellow at the Uncle Leopold Foundation. I'm not sure anybody else will mention this, but he was the kingpin, the leader of the 2014 Passenger Pigeon Commemoration. So he can talk more about that. Second speaker will be Mike Mossman, Forest Community Ecologist, retired from the DNR. And the third one will be Michael John Yeager, President of the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology. So Stan, please take over.
Thank you, Joe. It was a real pleasure to pull together this nomination for an individual whose induction into the Hall of Fame was long overdue. Bill Schorger's contributions, not only to the state of Wisconsin, but nationally and internationally, are probably best reflected in the story of the passenger pigeon. In 2014, when we commemorated the 100th anniversary of the passenger pigeon's extinction, Bill Schorger got a little bit of acknowledgement for the fact that it is largely because of his work that we understood the passenger pigeon's story as a cautionary tale for conservation. But here, locally in Wisconsin, he's probably best known for his natural history work and for his philanthropic support of conservation work within the state. And a lot of that was done quietly, so that perhaps many of you had not previously known about Bill Schorger. Bill Schorger's career was remarkable. He was one of these individuals who contributed to so many different fields, conservation and natural history just being one of the many areas in which he excelled. But it's primarily about his natural history work and his conservation work that we recognize him today. Bill Schorger grew up in the late 19th century when natural history was in its heyday. And Bill Schorger caught the natural history bug at a very young age. Growing up in Ohio, he became fascinated with nature, and from a very young age did something that was typical of naturalists of that period, is he started keeping journals, meticulous journals. And for those of you who don't fully understand what natural history is about observing nature in detail and recording those observations, and then retrospectively going back and looking at your recorded notes and trying to figure out the order and meaning of what you've observed in nature. And Bill Schorger excelled at this approach to understanding how nature worked. It was a passion that he continued literally throughout his life. He came to Wisconsin to get a PhD in chemistry. He specialized in the chemistry of cellulose and wood. He became the world's expert, actually, on cellulose and products made from cellulose. And being a very gifted scientist and researcher, he came up with many very lucrative patents for how you use wood products and cellulose. And those patents enriched the companies that he formed and Bill Schorger as well. His companies made a lot of money, and he was certainly able to indulge, you might say, his passion for natural history studies. His accumulated wealth allowed him to retire from a career as a chemist and businessman in midlife and devote the second half of his illustrious career to his real passion, which was natural history and wildlife conservation. He joined the faculty at the University of Wisconsin with an interesting arrangement. He said, I would like to spend the rest of my life on campus doing my natural history studies and conservation work. I'll do that for $1 a year. So for the next half of his career, for $1 a year, he became a professor in Aldo Leopold's department of wildlife management. And it was during that period that he made his most important contributions to wildlife conservation and natural history. Diligently rising, as he did every day before dawn and working well into the night on his meticulous studies of observations of nature made by Bill himself and by others. His accumulated wealth allowed him to also be a generous philanthropist to actually the 4 organizations that helped sponsor his nomination. But it was primarily, I think, something that we will all appreciate very much that left an enduring legacy. And that is that without Bill Schorger, Aldo Leopold's career in Wisconsin might have been very short, and there really no recognition, you might say, of Wisconsin as being the definitive home of all the Leopold and setting for a St. County almanac. And I say that because Bill Schorger and Aldo Leopold met in 1924 when Aldo Leopold was transferred to Wisconsin to the forest products lab in Madison. And of course, one of the first people that he met was this wood cellulose chemist, Bill Schorger. They hit it off right away. They were both avid bird watchers and naturalists. They were both avid hunters, and they became close friends. And Bill Schorger was one of the first individuals in Wisconsin to really buy into Aldo Leopold's then sort of groundbreaking ideas about wildlife management. This idea of moving wildlife conservation away from protecting wildlife to managing wildlife. And Bill Schorger invested, you might say, almost as a patron of Aldo Leopold's ideas. He was one of the participants in Aldo Leopold's initial experiment in Wisconsin, in this new idea of wildlife management, the little western Dane County town of Arlie, where Aldo Leopold set up an experimental area to try out his new ideas about managing wildlife habitat to improve the condition of wildlife. Bill Schorger supported that, was an active member. And then, after Aldo Leopold quit the U.S. Forest Service in 1928, Bill Schorger and a small group of Madisonians started lobbying the University of Wisconsin to consider hiring Aldo Leopold as a faculty member. And they had a steep hill to climb. It was the Great Depression. The university's budget was clearly in really poor shape. And they were lobbying for a guy who had no graduate degree, who had never taught a course in his life, and who represented a field that had never before been present in the halls of academia. When you think about it, why would it be that the College of Agriculture in 1933 invest a precious faculty position in somebody with those credentials? Well, by this time, Aldo Leopold had made an impression on Madison, certainly. And it certainly was, in no small part, the behind-the-scenes work of Bill Schorger and several of Aldo's other hunting and bird-watching buddies that they quietly, behind the scenes, donated the funds to cover Aldo Leopold's salary for the first 5 years. So the fact that Aldo Leopold was hired was in no small part due to Bill Schorger's investment in Madison. And it continued in 1938 when Aldo Leopold almost left Wisconsin to become the director of the Biological Survey in Washington, D.C. Bill Schorger once again stepped up to the plate, this time lobbying for a retention package that would keep Leopold at the university. And the retention package, the lure to keep Leopold in Wisconsin, was to give him his own department. That was the first department of wildlife management anywhere in the world. The University of Wisconsin became the first university at any place in the world to offer degrees in this new field of wildlife management. So without Bill Schorger, Aldo Leopold, the initial inductee into Wisconsin Hall of Fame, might well not have had any Wisconsin connections at all. Well, Bill Schorger, of course, was not only a distinguished naturalist and conservationist, but he was also a very prolific writer. In keeping up with his journaling and his research into historical records, he did the obligation, basically, and that was not just to do all that work, but to write it up. And he was a prolific writer. 2 of his books were award-winning books. The book on the passenger pigeon, that essentially is the definitive account of the passenger pigeon's biology, was recognized by the American Ornithologists Union as the outstanding ornithological publication in the Western Hemisphere. Bill Schorger's other publications, which you'll hear about in a moment, documented the natural history of Wisconsin, telling us something about what Wisconsin was like in the past, essentially establishing a baseline of our knowledge of ecological conditions in the state. Schorger's field work, his writing, his research was only one part of his contributions. He was also a major leader in the conservation arena during his time. In many sense, as this clipping from the State Journal says, Schorger is a natural for conservation books. He was well regarded as one of the leading experts on the ecology of Wisconsin when he was appointed to the Wisconsin Conservation Commission. And to his credit, he did something that was quite important, and that was to bring a solid focus on science to the commission's work. He was the president of the Wisconsin Academy of Sciences, Arts, and Letters, and in that capacity, he started a program for young people to link scientific research and conservation together. He was the founder and director of the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology. Birds were really his most important passion, and as you'll hear later on, it was probably what he will be most remembered for by most people. He was a director at the national level. He was on the board of directors of the National Audubon Society. He was a very influential person on their board, again, as being a person who promoted science within the organization. And finally, his generous support for many other conservation organizations and groups. On a personal note, I can say that, I am the beneficiary to some extent of Bill Schorger's patronage of Aldo Leopold and his philanthropic generosity. I inherited, you might say, the position that Aldo Leopold once held. It was created in no small part because of Bill Schorger's work. My career was spent in the department that came about essentially because of Bill Schorger's advocacy. And reflecting his philanthropic concerns, he left the University of Wisconsin's Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology, what at the time was the largest philanthropic gift the University of Wisconsin had ever received to support wildlife conservation work. And over the years since his passing, literally dozens of students have been supported by his generosity. So Bill Schorger, from local things to international things, is well-deserving of induction into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. I'm going to turn the podium over now to Mike Crossman, over there, to tell you a little bit about his Wisconsin focus on natural history.
Thanks, Dan. Schorger was a naturalist, an avid and brilliant student of natural history. His knowledge came from his own observations, from his tireless mining of the literature, and reading into it. He kept his own field notes, meticulous and clear, for nearly 60 years, from 1912 through 71, just before his death. 1,500 pages of them. Aside from being valuable on their own, these notes were used for important publications, such as on the birds and mammals of Dane County, and a publication that never really saw the light, still in manuscript form on the Natural History of Dane County. He was an avid collector, bibliophile, ever ready to collect and share observations. Oops. Ever ready to collect and share observations and not waste his time. When he was in business, he made frequent use of his business trips between Madison and Freeport, Illinois, to record the species and locations of road-killed birds. 700 trips over 18 years, he logged hundreds of road-killed birds of 64 species. This gives you some idea of his personality. This was summarized in a simple publication seen here, which pioneered a topic that has gained relevance increasingly with the prevalence of roads and traffic, and what has become an important source of mortality in wildlife. The study is important from a historical perspective as well. You can't see it here, but the second most common species that you found killed on roads, maybe some of you can remember these days, was the red-headed woodpecker. A species that now has disappeared from many parts of its habitat and range. Anyway, this was a study that was simple, but repeatable and provided a baseline for future observations by others. Schorger pursued this interest in establishing baselines for wildlife populations with much more depth and rigor in his remarkable research on the history of Wisconsin wildlife populations. For those of us who work in this field, Schorger is known as the godfather of it. His brilliant, receptive mind, tenacious memory, combined with a thoroughness, a downright doggedness in his research, and his determination to always complete and publish his work, never with a co-author, are hard to imagine ever being matched by someone else. This work left us with a great wealth of historical background on many of our wildlife species. This is background that helps us understand how the world came to be what it is today and its potential. It helps us to see our trajectory and be able to help guide that trajectory into the future. Of course, the historical information was already there among the old newspapers, the journals, the obscure reports, and the memories of old timers. What it took was a Schorger to make it useful and accessible, not just collecting it, but organizing and interpreting it. In 1937, Schorger and Leopold hatched the idea of having students and others review all Wisconsin newspapers published up until 1900. They mean anything related to natural history. This was funded by the Depression era WPA. After 3 years, Schorger took on the task by himself. For years, every afternoon on his way home from the office, Schorger turned up at the State Historical Society Library to have a go at the literature. A librarian there once remarked to him in a tone of utter despair, "I've moved more tons of papers for you than for any other 10 persons in Wisconsin." His transcriptions were handwritten, and these were the days when he didn't search, copy, paste, and put it into a database somewhere. These are the days of handwritten transcriptions, note cards, and trying to organize things, and moving a lot from library to library to the stacks and other places. The entire project resulted in some 786 pages of type notes. In addition, he scoured hundreds of volumes of primary and secondary sources of information on the history of Wisconsin for anything related to wildlife populations and their uses and habitats. This contributed to his 2 monographs on the pigeon and wild turkey, and also to a series of 25 papers published mostly in Transactions, the Wisconsin Academy of Science, Arts, and Letters, on the history of many species of Wisconsin wildlife. The first was titled The Crow and Raven in Early Wisconsin, published in 1941. His publications were always thorough, scholarly, perceptive, if rather dry. They're an absolutely fascinating and precious gift to anyone interested in the subject. These are reprinted, these 25 articles, by the student chapter of the Wildlife Society, UW Stevens Point, and they deserve our gratitude here today. I just want to read one quote from Joe Hickey, ornithologist who was in the same department, a close friend, and worked with Leopold as well. Just describing Schorger's personality. Hickey wrote, "Once after an architect questioned me about pigeons on a particular window of a newly erected convent, I asked Schorger if he thought a board with sharp protruding nails would act as a pigeon deterrent. His reply was that the idea had been used successfully with bronze spikes when the temple in Jerusalem was rebuilt by Herod the Great." 2 days later, Schorger produced the citation. And I think also in regard to Schorger's interest in Americana and his introverted nature, not very personable to most. He also said Schorger seemed to know Daniel Boone better than he did his own father. There's a great ode to Schorger from Bob McCabe, really well written and pretty funny. A good friend, very affectionate review of Schorger and his personality and works and his accomplishments in the 1993 issue of the Pastime Pigeon, the Journal of the Wisconsin Society of Ornithology. If you're interested. I never knew Schorger, and yet once I developed an interest in the history of wildlife and its habitats, I was intimately connected with him through what he left for us. He died just before I started developing my wildlife history book, where I admired him immensely and considered him one of my most important mentors. I think that what I could say probably goes as well for Sumner Madison, who's here. who worked with me on a lot of wildlife history projects. My respect and admiration for Schorger was nowhere as clear as when, many times, I was slowly excavating the library stacks alone at night. At the end of some long thread of endeavor, I would finally find the gem I was after. I would open up the old volume, page excitedly but gingerly. It's a long lost chapter, feel very much to explore, discovering a forgotten land. And here in the margins, like a flag already planted on the beach, were Schorger's telltale little damn pencil marks. I'd like to introduce the next speaker. This is Michael John Schorger.
Well, excuse me if I'm a little distracted here. For about 2 hours now, I've been thinking about this can of sardines. I may have to wander off with those. As Stan and Mike have both talked about, Bill Schorger really did remarkable research on wildlife, but he was particularly interested in the passenger pigeon and wild turkey. Now, I've been a member of WSO for about 50 years, and we have a quarterly journal, scientific journal, named The Passenger Pigeon. And kudos to Stan, he was our editor of that for a number of years. But you know, I'm really kind of embarrassed and surprised that really until a few months ago, it never occurred to me to ask or wonder why it was called the passenger pigeon. And you know, sometimes answers are sitting there in plain sight, and I do bet Schorger probably had something to do with that. And I'm just glad our journal isn't called the turkey. So Bill was a persistent seeker of facts. And if I can get this to work in the right direction. He gleaned fascinating bits of natural history knowledge from eyewitness accounts from many early sources. His historical documents he digested included journals and diaries of explorers and travelers, government reports, books, journals, newspapers. His tireless pursuit of this information required repeated trips to libraries, archives, and museums, just as Mike has talked about. And this was all before copying machines or before we had cell phones with the built-in cameras that you can take pictures of things. He carefully transcribed by hand each new finding until it grew into a huge collection of notes, and he applied with vengeance, this to the old records of passenger pigeons. For some reason, the passenger pigeons seemed to capture him probably more than any other species. And as noted in this slide, he accumulated probably more than 10,000 eyewitness accounts of passenger pigeons. Now, he noted that it was not an easy task to reconstruct the life history of an extinct species in the face of large and contradictory literature, since much of that is beyond absolute proof. Now, accounts were often filled with falsehoods or rumors or notions the observers held because someone earlier had told them something, or it was passed down from person to person, oftentimes without a factual basis. And you know, I think fake news maybe isn't as recent as maybe some of us think. So Bill had to really sort through all of this, and he had to take information which was really kind of questionable in its reliability. And he really lamented the fact that no one had undertaken any serious scientific studies of passenger pigeons while there was still time to do so. You know, basic life history of passenger pigeons, things as simple as clutch size, no one had ever studied. And it took him years to figure out what, even some of these really basic facts. And so for him, this piecing together this remarkable story of pigeon biology, given the type of information he had to work with, was really a tremendous feat. Now, Bill Schorger is maybe best known for his passenger pigeon and wild turkey books, but he was very active in other research. And he was, as Stan had mentioned, a very significant source of support for many early conservationists and conservation organizations. For example, my organization, he was instrumental in founding 79 years ago, back in 1939. He, along with Walter Scott, were WSO's 2 sustaining charter members, which I think is probably because they bankrolled our startup. And many of you may recognize Walter Scott's name, as he's a previous Conservation Hall of Fame inductee. Now, there were also 4 other charter members, regular members of WSO when we started back in 1949, including Wallace Grange, Owen Grommy, Fran Hammerstrom, and Alta Leopold. And finally, to finish off my little bit of self-promotion here, with the induction of Roy Lukes earlier today, WSO now has 8 past presidents who have been inducted into the Hall. I'm a little afraid that given my own trials as presidency, this last record will probably stand for a while. But clearly, WSO and the Hall of Fame have many shared members, and that's one of the reasons I've been delighted to be part of the board's, or the Hall's board of directors. Now, Bill Schorger served in our initial board of directors with WSO, and over the years he published many articles in our passenger pigeon journal, some of which Stan and Mike have already pointed out. Now, in 1947, WSO erected at Wyalusing State Park a monument to the passenger pigeon, as Joe has mentioned. And the monument is placed high on the bluff in the park. From it is a commanding view of the confluence of the Wisconsin and Mississippi rivers. Extensive river-bottom forests cover the foreground, extending out to the rivers. Bluffs on the Iowa side of the Mississippi provide the backdrop. And it's an exceptional place to watch birds moving along the river valleys. And if you're really, really astute observer and really squint, some days you might even see Mike Mossman and Lisa Hartman canoeing in the river bottom forest, if you really pay attention. A year before the monument was constructed, its bronze plaque was unveiled at WSO's annual convention. As part of the unveiling, Alta Leopold delivered a dedication speech called "On Monument to a Pigeon." And well, this will keep coming back as kind of a theme here. That speech, with a bit of a rewrite, ultimately became part of his Sand County Almanac. Now, as we know, Schorger was particularly fascinated with passenger pigeons. He had already written several important papers on pigeons' life history and ecology. And as part of the monument dedication, WSO published a booklet titled "Silent Wings, a Memorial to the Passenger Pigeon." And Silent Wings had 2 of Schorger's pigeon papers, the initial rewrite of Leopold's "On a Monument to a Pigeon," and a paper by Arlie H.T. Jackson on attitude and conservation. Now, WSO, back in 2014, as part of our 75th anniversary celebration, reprinted Silent Wings, which is a wonderful booklet. I had put sort of my remaining final stash of these out on the table out there. If you have a chance to grab one, if anyone left, take it. It's a really nice publication. But we also that year had the monument refurbished. We held a dedication ceremony at the monument during our convention. And as I say, I put this out, and please take a copy if there's any left. Now, one of the things about the pit or the monument was the brass plaque on the monument was the wording was actually written by Schorger. And on the plaque, it states that this was dedicated to the last passenger pigeon shot in Wisconsin, last Wisconsin passenger pigeon, shot at Babcock, September 1899. This species became extinct through the avarice and thoughtlessness of man. Now, in his preface to his passenger pigeon book, Schorger took that thought a little bit further. And he says in his passenger pigeon book, "The pigeon was gone, but its passing was a sober lesson to mankind. It brought to sharp attention the fact that a species can become a non-renewable resource. The wanton slaughter and extinction of this bird did more than all the laws put together to focus the attention of the American people on the necessity of protecting what we have before it is too late. One of the aims of this book is to give a record of a great transgression in the hope that future generations will avoid a similar one." I do think if Dr. Schorger were here, he would be pleased today by much of the progress we've made in protecting our resources. But I also think he would add that we still have work to do. Thank you very much. Back over to Joe.
Thank you very much, the speakers. Weaving a very interesting story of Arlie Schorger. How many of us, or how many of you wish you had a chance to have met that man? And how many of us wish we had had a chance to see a passage pigeon? I think his lesson, and a lesson of that species, that beautiful bird, should carry us through the next day, the next week, and the next century, in terms of how many other species are at the brink of disaster at the avarice of man. So maybe to end with such a happy note, I want to thank you all for coming. I think I have one final slide here. Oh, we didn't do that part, did we? Okay. Maybe I'm getting hungry like the rest of you.
All right. So, know you by these presents, whereas every year the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame inducts a select group of individuals into the Hall of Fame to recognize the important contributions each has made to natural resource management and conservation. And whereas Arlie published Passenger Pigeon, Its Natural History and Extinction in 1955, the first book to be published on the topic, and The Wild Turkey, Its History and Domestication in 1966. And whereas he played a pivotal role in launching Aldo Leopold's career in conservation and helped to advance a global concern for wildlife management and biodiversity through research and writings. Now, therefore, the members of the Wisconsin Legislature do hereby commend and congratulate Arlie Schorger on his tremendous accomplishments and legacy and well-deserved induction to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame.
Likewise, presentation of the replica of the plaque. Arlie Schorger will not appreciate this directly, but I think Stan has a perfect place for it, and maybe you can tell him about it.
Indeed, Joe. One of Bill Schorger's gifts to the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology was to endow our library a reading room. So this will have a place of prominence in the A.W. Schorger Reading Room on campus. And looking at the legislative citation, he already has 2 of these from the past, a long time ago, but we'll add this to the most recent. So thank you very much.
Time to wrap things up and move on to the dinner. I want to thank all of the presenters today. I guess maybe I spent a lot of time in the classroom, both as a student in graduate school, undergraduate school, and then teaching. And I find that I'm always fascinated by learning. And I have found that this being my 33rd induction ceremony, that I find it a fascinating way to learn. How many of you would agree that you learned a lot about conservation today? And how many would agree that you learned really more than you ever wanted to know? At the same time, a fascinating field. We encourage all of you who are interested in conservation to continue and support it. I would like to, again, invite you to become members of the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. My plea story earlier was that if we want to continue this heritage, this legacy, we need additional support, we need financial support, and we need individual members who are willing to come forward and help out with some of the backstory work that needs to be done to carry on the traditions. The good thing, we don't have to travel. Typically, we have to travel from one building to another. Our dinner is right here. I'd like to maybe just close with just 3 comments about Buckeye. like Arlie Schorger and others of you like books. I encourage you to find a good copy, maybe even at a used store where I found this many years ago of Charlotte and Roy's book. The other thing, realize that she's a fantastic artist, and to look a little bit more at her artwork. And if we go back to one of those sketches just earlier, I want to recognize again, because she doesn't very often come, but my good daughter, Dawn Massimo, who has created the sketches from the photographs. I want to thank you for all of your effort, and if you need a good artist or a glass maker, a glass artist, her skills are phenomenal. Also a good painter and a good artist generally. And book-wise, pick up a copy of the new edition of this. I was telling Michael John earlier that I was intrigued by it. I didn't know they were any available. I went online and I was amazed. There was only one copy available in an antique store in La Crosse. And when it arrived, I see it's like yours. It was bounded. And that I would guess it eventually at one point belonged to the Walter Scott directly, because his nameplate is in the book. So there's a lot of history. By the way, I'm going to ask just two other general questions. Does this room work for this kind of ceremony? Very comfortable. I think sometimes the theater had been kind of almost too formal, difficult to get in and out. So thank you very much for sharing the day with us, and I hope you can get home before the snow comes.